We've talked a lot about the church in the United States. We've talked about the local church. We've talked about theological emphases looking forward. Tell me what your thoughts are around a worldwide denomination trying to find its way at a time where we're struggling with what connectionalism really means and would look like in a worldwide denomination in which the U.S. is perhaps not the center.
Let me say that while 90% of my illustrations, if not more, have been U.S. centric, because it's what I know best. I believe that our intention and aspiration to be an effective and fruitful global church is the right aspiration and emphasis. What I've said about teaching and doctrine, I would say that across the whole. So those things about grace for all, engagement with context and community, the intent on my part was that's true no matter where we are. As United Methodists, and we as what has been a U.S. centric church need to. One of the questions that is harder for us to ask is, what is it that we have to learn all around the church from each other? And because there's been so much focus on the U.S. When we've been in global gatherings, et cetera, where are the places where we need to spend less time talking and more time listening to sisters and brothers that are serving in other parts of the world? And where do we begin to do a kind of a co-missioning, and I want to say a real back and forth of missioning one another? See, we have this whole multi-century history of sending people from the United States and Europe into other places in the so-called third or developing world. We need to be missioned in the United States, for example. Europe needs to be remissioned, I humbly say to my European sisters and brothers. What do we have to learn from our sisters and brothers in Africa, in the Philippines, and I would say in Latin America? And while those are mostly affiliated autonomous churches, which is a whole nother conversation, there is so much because of global migration that we need to be learning. If nothing else, global migration and immigration matters are reasons why we need to stay as a global church and learn from one another. However, or in addition to that, there needs to be space specific to do work in those larger national or continental contexts. And I want to say both because Africa is a continent, not one nation. So what's good in DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, may not be as applicable in countries of West Africa. So it's both national and continental context, and certainly that's true in Europe. So we need some air and some space, but I don't want it to be just that Americans need air and space to maneuver, because then that quickly, if we're going to be brutally and as well as truthfully honest, narrows things pretty much to one or two subject matters. I think everybody needs some of that space. Now, how we define that in terms of polity, that's where we're stuck. That's where we're stuck. And I do think we have some examples in history of varying movements that you don't cease to be a Jew, for example, in our context in America, because you're not a Orthodox Jew, but you're Reformed and conservative. I'm not suggesting that they may not have jokes about one another and caricatures, but you don't cease to be, you don't cease in your Jewishness. And I think there are other examples. If you look at some of the streams of traditions around Amish and Mennonite sisters and brothers, there are shadings and nuances around that where people have been given space, but their identity is not taken. Well, you're not one, and that's what I fear, that when we get stuck on a couple of places, we want to say, well, if you do that, you're not a real United Methodist. Well, I think we ought to let there be a little more air and space than that. I think there are some things, because we're not consistent. We're not consistent. You can be a United Methodist and believe any doggone thing you want in spite of our teaching in the social principles, for example, on the death penalty. So you can be strongly anti-abortion and as a United Methodist and find a very comfortable space, and you can be virulently in favor of execution of other human beings. So I'm saying, well, we actually practically have already learned how to give each other room, and by that I mean we don't discount people if they don't toe to certain things that we subscribe to. So I think there ought to be some things that you have to subscribe to be a United Methodist. Let me be clear. I think we ought to work at that list being clearer, sharper, and shorter.
Mm-hmm. So Bishop, thank you. Is there anything else that I haven't asked you that you would want to share?
Absolutely not. You've allowed me to comment freely along the way, and so I'm going to stand down, and please accept my gratitude for you, for your ministry, the ministry of the Connectional Table, and this opportunity.
Thank you so much. This has been a joy. Thank you.